The last thing the king ever said was not a command, it was a warning. Protect her. The palace still hummed with low electric light, as Ethan Cole stood exactly 2 steps behind the throne platform. Hands steady, breath measured, every sensor in his suit ticking in quiet rhythm, like a second heartbeat. No one questioned his presence. That was the point. A human in black uniform, a shadow with clearance. The air smelled faintly metallic, like polished steel, and cold ozone beyond the towering glass walls. The capital stretched for miles, glowing in soft blue lines under a sky that never fully darkened. Ethan didn't look at the stars. He never did not since that night. Instead, his eyes stayed forward, scanning exits, angles, reflections. Training burned into muscle memory. Princess Lyra Viral entered without announcement, her footsteps light but precise. The room adjusted to her presence. Guards straightened, advisors lowered their gaze. She moved like gravity. Belonged to her alone, tall, poised, skin a luminous shade of blue that caught the light like water. Her silver hair fell over one shoulder, untouched by the static hum of the room. Ethan shifted half an inch, placing himself between her and the open corridor. No one noticed, except her. She always noticed. She stopped just short of the throne platform, where her father used to stand. Silence followed, not respectful, not peaceful, just unfinished. She didn't look at Ethan when she spoke, but her voice carried sharp and controlled. They still haven't found him. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. No, Your Highness, the investigation continues. A pause, the kind that stretched longer than it should. She turned slightly, her eyes catching his for the first time, bright, calculating, searching for something. She didn't yet know. You were there that night, weren't you? He didn't hesitate. Yes, her gaze held as longer than necessary, as if measuring weight against truth. Then she looked away. Good, she said softly, because when I find the one who did this, I want someone beside me who understands what was taken. Ethan said nothing. Silence was safer outside. A low alarm pulsed, once distant, harmless for now. His internal display flickered with minor alerts. Atmospheric shift, movement patterns, nothing immediate, but enough to keep him alert. Lyra stepped closer to the edge of the platform, looking out over the city. Her reflection split across the glass, fragile and infinite. At once. They think power protects us, she murmured, but it only paints a target. Ethan moved one step closer, just enough to cast a shadow over her reflection. Instinct, not permission. She noticed again. Of course, she did. Why do you do that, she asked, without turning. Position yourself like that, like I'm about to fall. Because you are, he almost said, but instead his voice stayed level. It's my job. A faint smile touched her lips, not warm, not cold, just curious. You don't talk like the others. No, he agreed. I don't. She exhaled slowly, the sound barely there, and for a moment the tension in her shoulders softened, almost human, almost vulnerable. Then it was gone, replaced by something sharper, stronger. I will find him, she said, not loudly, not angrily, just certain. And when I do, I won't hesitate. Ethan felt it. Then not fear, not guilt, something heavier, something that settled behind his ribs like a weight he'd chosen to carry. I know, he replied. She turned fully, now stepping past him close enough that he could feel the faint warmth of her skin against the cold air of the room. Her voice dropped to a whisper, meant only for him. Good, she said, because I need you to stand with me when it happens. Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe for half a second, because he already had stood there once, and next time he wouldn't be able to hide it. The city never truly slept. It only dimmed and breathed in slower cycles. And from 100 stories up, the wind carried a low hum through the glass like a living thing. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the observation corridor, his reflection faint against the transparent wall, while the capital stretched out in endless blue grids below. His suit display flickered softly across his vision, tracking movement, heat signatures, air pressure shifts. Nothing immediate, nothing simple. Princess Lyra moved ahead of him, her pace steady, but not hurried. The guards assigned to the outer ring kept their distance by her order. She preferred space, she preferred control, and tonight she had both, at least on the surface. You dismissed the rest, she said without turning. Yes, Your Highness, he answered, one step behind. As always, her reflection watched him instead of her eyes. The glass caught every detail, the slight tilt of his shoulders, the way his hands never fully relaxed. You trust your own instincts more than theirs, she continued. He considered the question for exactly 1 second before answering. I trust outcomes. A faint sound escaped her, something between a breath and a laugh. That is not an answer. It is the only one that matters. She stopped walking, the sudden stillness sharper than any raised voice. The city lights below shifted as a transport line rerouted, casting a slow-moving shadow across her face. When she finally turned to him, there was no anger, there only curiosity edged with something quieter. You speak like someone who has already seen the end of a story. Ethan did not respond immediately. The silence stretched just long enough to feel. Deliberate stories rarely end the way people expect. He said finally. Lyra studied him longer this time, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to pull something from beneath his words. Then tell me, she said, stepping closer, until only a few feet separated them. What do you think the end of mine looks like? The question landed heavier than it should have. He could hear the faint rhythm of her breathing, feel the shift in air between them. Every instinct told him to deflect, to redirect, to remain exactly what he was supposed to be, but something in her voice made that harder than usual. You survive, he said simply. She tilted her head slightly, as if weighing the answer. Survival is not the same as winning. No, it is not, he agreed. Then why do you sound certain? She pressed. Because you are still here, he replied. Her gaze sharpened at that, and for a brief moment something unguarded flickered across her expression, something almost like doubt. She turned away again, moving to the railing, her hand resting lightly against the cool metal. You were there, she said again, softer this time. The night, everything changed. Yes, he answered, the word steady, but heavier now. I do not remember everything, she continued. The official reports are incomplete or altered depending on who you ask. But I remember the silence afterward, the way the palace felt empty, even though it was full of people. She paused, her fingers tightening slightly against the railing, as if grounding herself. Everyone looked at me like I had already become something else. Ethan remained still behind her. You did? She glanced back at him over her shoulder, and for the first time, there was no distance in her eyes, no title, no barrier, just a question. And what am I becoming? He held her gaze longer than he should have. Something that cannot be controlled, he said quietly. The words hung between them, carried by the slow-moving air from the city below. Lyra turned fully, now closing the distance by another step, her voice dropping to something almost private. Then stay close, she said, because if I lose control, I want someone there who will not hesitate. Ethan felt the weight settle deeper inside him, the memory he never spoke of pressing against the present like a shadow that refused to fade. I will not hesitate, he answered, and this time it was not a promise, it was a truth. She nodded once, accepting it without question, and turned back toward the city, unaware that the man she had just trusted most was the one choice that had already shaped everything she was becoming. The alarm did not sound like panic, it sounded precise, a single low pulse repeating every 5 seconds, steady, controlled, intentional. Ethan Cole felt it before he heard it, the subtle shift in air pressure, the faint vibration through the floor beneath his boots. His display lit up with a cascade of warnings. Perimeter breach, Sector 7, unauthorized movement signatures, 3 figures, fast, controlled, not random. Lyra turned instantly, her posture sharpening, as if the sound itself had given her direction. What is that? She asked, already moving toward the inner corridor. Ethan stepped ahead of her, cutting off her path with one smooth motion. Stay behind me this time. She did not argue. The corridor lights dimmed, automatically shifting into security mode, casting long shadows across the polished metal walls. Their footsteps echoed differently, now sharper, faster. The palace was no longer a place of ceremony, it was a structure under stress. Ethan's hand hovered near his sidearm, not drawing, not yet every movement calculated, distance, angles, exits, his mind mapping the space faster than the system could update. Lyra stayed close behind him, closer than before. He could feel the heat of her presence through the cold air. Why is there no full alert? She asked. Because whoever triggered this does not want attention, he replied quietly, and that means they know the system. Her silence told him she understood what that implied. Someone inside, someone close. They reached the intersection ahead where the corridor split into 3 paths. Ethan slowed just enough to listen, not with his ears, but with everything else. A faint scrape of metal to the left, a shift of air behind the right passage, and something else straight ahead, something too still to trust. He made the choice, left. He moved without hesitation. Lyra followed the sound, growing clearer, now footsteps measured, deliberate, not rushing, not afraid. They were not fleeing, they were approaching. Ethan stopped just before the turn, raising one hand behind him, a silent signal. Lyra froze instantly, her breathing steady, controlled. He leaned slightly enough to catch the reflection in the wall panel. 3 figures, armored, not palace guard, their silhouettes unfamiliar, but disciplined. One of them turned slightly, as if sensing the shift. Ethan stepped out, then fast enough to take control of the moment, but not escalate. It stopped. His voice cut through the corridor, calm but absolute. The figures halted, not surprised, Not alarmed one stepped forward, removing a helmet just enough to reveal a face marked with the insignia of the Inner Council. Ethan recognized it immediately, not by name, but by access level high enough to be dangerous. "You are out of your assigned sector," the man said, his tone neutral, but edged with authority. "Security override authorized by Council directive." Ethan did not lower his stance. "There was no directive issued to my channel then." "Your channel is no longer sufficient," the man replied. Lyra stepped forward before Ethan could stop her, her voice sharper than before. "I did not authorize any movement in my palace." The man's gaze shifted to her, and for a brief moment something unreadable passed through his expression. "Princess," he said with a slight inclination of his head, "this is a precaution for what?" She demanded. A pause, not long, but deliberate. "For instability," he answered. The word landed heavier than any alarm. Lyra's posture stiffened beside Ethan. He could feel the shift in her, the control tightening around something deeper. Ethan stepped forward again, placing himself between them, his voice lower now, but no less firm. "You are dismissed. Return to your sector." The man studied him for a second longer, then replaced his helmet. Without another word, the three figures turned and moved away, their footsteps fading back into the dim corridors. The silence that followed felt different, heavier, closer. Lyra did not move for a moment. Then she exhaled slowly. "Instability," she repeated under her breath, her eyes lifting to meet Ethan's, and for the first time, there was something else there, not just control, not just curiosity, something closer to doubt or fear. "They are watching me," she said quietly. Ethan did not look away. "They have been for a long time," he answered, and as the corridor lights flickered once more, he realized the danger was no longer outside. It had already closed in around them, and this time there would be no distance between truth and consequence. The corridor felt narrower on the way back, as if the walls themselves had shifted closer, the light no longer steady, but breathing in faint pulses that mirrored the rhythm of the distant alarm. Ethan Cole walked half a step ahead of Princess Lyra, his pace controlled, but faster than before, every sensor in his suit running continuous scans, and still finding nothing concrete, only patterns that did not align, only silence where there should have been noise. "They want you to react," he said quietly. Without turning, Lyra followed close enough that her voice reached him. "Without echo." "React to what?" "To them, to fear, to doubt, to anything that makes you easier to predict." She let out a slow breath, her steps matching his exactly. "Then they have already started," she said, "because I am beginning to question everything ahead." The corridor opened into a wider chamber, a transition point between the inner palace and the restricted archives, a place few were allowed to enter without direct authorization. Ethan slowed, then stopped, his gaze lifting to the security panel beside the sealed door. The interface flickered once before, stabilizing. "Clearance level required, royal override." Lyra moved past him, this time her hand lifting to the panel. Without hesitation, the light shifted, recognizing her presence. Instantly, the door responded with a soft mechanical release as it opened into darkness beyond. "You are not supposed to bring me here," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. She stepped inside anyway, her silhouette outlined by the faint light behind them. "Nothing about tonight is supposed to happen," she replied. The chamber inside was colder, the air still untouched by the constant circulation of the palace above. Rows of data vaults lined the walls, each one sealed behind transparent panels that glowed faintly with stored memory, history, records, decisions that shaped entire worlds. Ethan stepped in after her, the door closing quietly behind them, sealing the space in near silence. "What are you looking for?" he asked. Lyra moved deeper into the chamber, her fingers brushing lightly against one of the panels, as if searching for something familiar. "The truth," she said simply. The word carried no hesitation, no uncertainty. Ethan watched her for a moment longer, then shifted his attention to the room, scanning corners, reflections, anything that felt out of place. And then he saw it. One panel near the center had a different glow, not brighter, not dimmer, just wrong. The pattern of its light did not match the rest. He stepped toward it slowly. Lyra noticed immediately. "What is it?" she asked. He did not answer right away, his hand hovering just above the surface, without touching. "This one was accessed recently," he said. She moved beside him, her eyes narrowing as she studied the panel. "That is impossible. This section is sealed under my authority." Ethan finally touched the surface. The panel responded instantly, unlocking without resistance, as if it had been waiting. The screen inside flickered to life, lines of data cascading downward until they stopped on a single entry timestamped within the last hour. Lyra leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Open it." Ethan hesitated for half a second, then complied. The file expanded, revealing fragments, incomplete logs, corrupted identifiers, But one detail remained clear: a designation code tied to a specific operation. Lyra's breath caught slightly as she read it aloud. Project Succession. Ethan felt the weight of the words settle into place, something old, something buried, rising to the surface. That is not a council directive, she said, her voice tighter now. That is classified beyond even them. Then, who authorized it? Ethan asked, though part of him already knew. Lyra did not answer immediately, her gaze fixed on the screen, as if the truth might shift if she looked long enough. Then slowly, almost unwillingly, she spoke. My father did. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before. Ethan did not move, did not speak, because the implication had already formed in both of their minds. Lyra stepped back slightly, her expression changing, not breaking, but adjusting, like something inside her had been forced into a new shape. He started this, she said quietly, not to Ethan, but to herself. The system flickered again, the file distorting, as if something somewhere had noticed their access. Then the screen went dark completely, the panel sealing itself. Without warning, Lyra looked at Ethan, now her eyes no longer searching, but certain. We are no longer looking for answers, she said. We are being led to them. Ethan nodded, once the realization settling into his chest. Then we need to decide if we follow, he said, and for the first time since the alarm began, Lyra did not answer immediately, because whatever waited at the end of that path was no longer just a threat. It was something far more dangerous, the truth itself. The silence after the screen went dark felt louder than the alarm had ever been. The chamber, holding its breath around them, as if the walls themselves were listening. Ethan Cole did not move right away, his eyes still fixed on the sealed panel, as though it might flicker back to life if he waited long enough. It did not. Lyra stepped back slowly, her hand lowering from the interface, her posture still controlled, but something beneath it had shifted, not broken, not yet, but no longer untouched. My father authorized it, she repeated, softer now, as if the words needed time to settle into reality. Ethan finally turned toward her, the distance between them small, but heavier than before. Then, this was not random, he said, it was planned. Lyra's gaze lifted to meet his, and for the first time, there was no certainty in it, only calculation layered over something deeper, something more fragile. Planned for what, she asked. Ethan considered the question carefully, not rushing, because whatever answer he gave would shape everything that followed. Succession, he said, the word measured, deliberate. That is not just a project name, it is a transition protocol. Lyra's brow tightened slightly as she processed that transition to what she pressed. Ethan held her gaze long enough for the meaning to form on its own. Leadership change without external interference. The room felt colder after that, the air still but sharper. Lyra turned away from him again, her steps slow as she moved deeper into the chamber, her fingers brushing across another panel, but not opening it. Not yet. He would not remove himself without a reason, she said quietly, almost to herself. Ethan did not respond immediately, because the same thought had already crossed his mind. Leaders did not create succession protocols unless they believed their time was limited or their control was not absolute. Lyra stopped at the far end of the chamber, where a larger central console stood dormant, its surface reflecting the faint glow of the surrounding vaults. She rested her hands lightly against it, her shoulders squared as if preparing for something she could not yet see. Then something changed, not in her posture, but in the way she stood, less like a daughter and more like someone being forced into a role she had not chosen. If this was his plan, she said slowly, then why hide it, why bury it beneath layers even I cannot access? Ethan stepped closer, the sound of his boots muted against the floor, because it was not meant to be found. He answered, not until the right moment. Lyra turned sharply at that, her eyes locking onto his. What moment? She demanded, her voice still controlled, but no longer distant. Ethan paused just long enough to feel the weight of the answer before speaking. When the system decides it is time for the next ruler, the words settled between them, heavier than anything before. Lyra stared at him, as if searching for something else in his expression, some sign that this was speculation, not truth. But Ethan did not look away. He never did. The silence stretched, then broke under a quiet sound, not from them, but from the console beneath her hands. A faint pulse of light spread across its surface, slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat. Both of them froze. Lyra's breath caught almost imperceptibly as the console activated, without command, lines of data rising into the air, forming a projection between them, incomplete at first, fragmented, but stabilizing quickly. Ethan's instincts flared, every warning signal firing at once, but there was nowhere to move, nowhere to redirect. Whatever this was, it had already begun. The projection sharpened, revealing a figure not fully defined, but unmistakable in presence. The outline of a man tall, composed, familiar. Lyra's hand tightened slightly. Against the console, her voice barely a whisper. No, Ethan felt it, then the shift, not in the room, but in her, the moment where doubt began to turn into something else, something harder. The figure spoke, not loud, not commanding, but certain. Lyra, if you are seeing this, then the system has made its choice. Ethan did not move, did not speak, because the truth was no longer approaching. It was already here, and this time, it was not hidden behind silence. It was speaking directly to her. The projection did not flicker. It stabilized with a clarity that made the air feel heavier. The figure now fully formed, not alive, but not distant either. His presence carried the same weight. It always had authority. Without effort, Princess Lyra did not move, her eyes locked onto the image, as if any motion might break it. Her voice, when it came, was barely audible. Father. The figure regarded her with a calm that felt deliberate, not cold, not warm, simply certain. If you are seeing this, he repeated, then the system has confirmed what I feared, that control would fracture and that those around you would not be enough to protect what must continue. Lyra's breath tightened, her shoulders pulling back, as if bracing against something unseen. You speak as if you expected this, she said. Ethan remained where he was, just behind her, but closer than before, every part of him alert, not to the projection, but to her. The way she stood, the way her balance shifted under the weight of the moment. The figure inclined his head slightly. Expectation is not hope, Lyra. It is preparation. The projection shifted slightly, data streams moving behind him like distant stars. Your position was never meant to be permanent. It was a bridge, a necessary one, but not the final form. Lyra's eyes narrowed, confusion and tension threading together. Then what am I? She asked, the question sharper, now less controlled. Ethan felt it, the change, the moment where curiosity began to turn into resistance. The figure did not hesitate. You are the catalyst, he said. The word landed with precision, not meant to comfort, not meant to explain, only to define. The chamber seemed to grow colder, the light from the console casting long shadows that did not quite align. Lyra stepped back one step, then another, her hand leaving the surface as if the connection itself had weighed. A catalyst for what? She pressed, her voice steady, but no longer soft. For succession, he replied. For continuity, for survival. Lyra shook her head once, small but decisive. That is not an answer, that is a justification. Ethan's gaze shifted between her and the projection, measuring distance, timing reaction. The figure's expression did not change, because the answer was never meant to be accepted. He said it was meant to be understood. Lyra let out a quiet breath, not relief, not anger, something in between, something unresolved. Understood, she repeated, then tell me this. She stepped forward again, her posture straightening, her voice rising just enough to carry intent. What happens to a catalyst when the reaction is complete? The chamber fell into a silence, so complete it felt like pressure. Ethan felt his chest tighten, just slightly, because he already knew the answer even before the figure spoke. It is no longer needed. The words came without hesitation, without softness. Lyra did not react immediately, her face still, her eyes fixed on the projection, as if searching for something else behind the statement, something human, something that might change its meaning. But there was nothing. The figure continued, as if the question itself had already been accounted for. The system will guide the transition, the council will execute it, and the protector will ensure it is done correctly. Ethan felt the shift, then sharp, immediate, like a line drawn through the room. Lyra turned her head slowly toward him, not fully, not yet, but enough for him to feel the weight of her attention. Protector, she repeated the word, quieter now, but far more dangerous. Ethan did not move, did not speak, because there was no version of this moment that could be altered. The projection remained steady between them, but it no longer mattered. The truth had already stepped into the space between two people who had trusted each other just moments before. Lyra's voice came again, softer, but edged with something new, something colder. What does the protector do when the one they are assigned to becomes unnecessary? Ethan held her gaze, now fully meeting it, because this was no longer about distance or protocol. It was about the one thing he could not avoid, the truth. The projection did not answer immediately, and in that silence something else took its place, something heavier than command, something closer to choice. Ethan exhaled once, slow, controlled, then spoke for the first time since the message began. The protector makes a decision. The words settled between them, and for the first time the future did not feel like a plan. It felt like a fracture waiting to break. The silence after his words did not fade. It tightened like something unseen, pulling inward. Princess Lyra did not look away, her eyes locked onto Ethan Cole, as if the space between them had become the only thing that mattered. The projection still hovered behind her, the figure unchanged, waiting, but no longer in control of the moment. You knew? She said, her voice low, not raised, not broken, just precise. Ethan did not answer immediately because the question was not simple. It was not about knowledge. It was about when and why, and what he had chosen to do with it. The system is not new, he said finally, his tone steady. I recognize the structure. Lyra took a slow step toward him, closing the distance that had always been maintained between them. Recognized, she repeated. Then tell me something. She stopped just a few feet away, close enough now that there was no protocol left to hide behind. When did you realize what I was? Ethan met her gaze without flinching. From the beginning, he said the words, quiet but absolute. The chamber seemed to shift around them, the projection dimming slightly, as if even it could feel the change. Lyra's expression did not collapse, it sharpened, her shoulders straightening, her chin lifting just slightly, as if she had just been given something she could finally use. And you stayed, she said, not a question this time, a statement. Ethan nodded once. Yes. A faint breath left her, almost a laugh, but without warmth. Then that means one of two things, she continued, her voice gaining clarity with each word. Either you were waiting for the right moment to do what the system expects, or you made a different choice. Ethan did not move, the weight of that truth already settled inside him long before this moment. There was no reason to pretend now. I made a different choice, he said. Lyra studied him carefully, not searching now, but measuring, testing the shape of his answer against everything she had seen, everything she had felt from him since the day he arrived. And yet you never told me, she said, her voice quieter again, but no less sharp. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, not enough to show weakness, just enough to show something real, because telling you would not change what the system already decided, he replied. It would only take away the time you still had. Lyra's eyes narrowed at that time for what she asked for you to choose, he answered, the words landing with a weight that neither of them could ignore. The projection behind her flickered once, as if reacting to something unseen, data streams distorting for a fraction of a second before stabilizing again. But neither of them looked at it anymore. The truth was no longer in the system, it was standing between them. Lyra turned away slowly, not in retreat, but in thought, her gaze drifting toward the rows of silent data vaults, as if the answers might be hidden somewhere deeper than all of this. She said, gesturing lightly to the chamber, the system, the council, my father's message, it is all just a path leading to the same end. Ethan watched her closely, because this was the moment that mattered more than any alarm, more than any protocol. Yes, he said, unless you change it. She was still for a long second, then another, the quiet stretching until it felt like something might break under it. Finally, she spoke again, softer now, but with something new beneath it, something that had not been there before. If I refuse, she said, if I do not become what they design, what happens then? Ethan did not hesitate. Then they will come for you, not with chaos, not with force, but with certainty, because the system does not fail, it corrects. Lyra nodded once slowly, as if she had expected that answer, as if she had already begun to accept it. Then she turned back to him fully, and this time there was no distance left in her eyes, no title, no hierarchy, just two people standing in the middle of something far larger than both of them. And what do you do when that happens? She asked. Ethan held her gaze steady, the answer already chosen long before this moment, long before the projection, long before the truth had surfaced. I stand with you, he said, the words simple but final. And for the first time since the alarm began, the silence that followed was not empty, it was filled with something else, something fragile, but real, something the system had not accounted for. Choice. The projection dimmed again, not fully disappearing, but no longer the center of the room, as if whatever authority it held had been quietly replaced by something else. Princess Lyra did not step back, she did not create distance. Instead, she moved closer until the space between her and Ethan Cole was measured in inches, not protocol. The air felt different now, heavier, not with fear, but with consequence. You stand with me, she repeated, not questioning, but testing the shape of the words. Ethan did not shift his posture, did not soften his expression. I do. The simplicity of it made it harder to ignore. Lyra searched his face, not for hesitation, but for truth, and found none, which made everything more dangerous. Then you understand what that means, she said quietly. It means I am no longer under your protection. Ethan held her gaze steady. It means you are no longer under their control. The answer landed differently than the others, not as defense, but as something else, something that challenged the structure around them. Lyra exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just enough to show the weight she had been carrying. Then the system will act, she said. It will not wait for permission. It never does. Ethan nodded. Once I know. A faint sound echoed through the Chamber not mechanical, not environmental. Something deeper, like a shift in the foundation itself. Both of them felt it before they understood it. Lyra's eyes flicked briefly toward the console, where the projection had begun. The surface pulsed once more, brighter this time, more urgent. Ethan's display lit instantly, with cascading alerts. System override, cascading containment protocols, shifting authorization levels, changing in real time. They are initiating correction, he said, his voice low but controlled. Lyra did not look at the console. She kept her focus on him. How long? Ethan scanned the data in front of him. Seconds, maybe less. The chamber lights dimmed further, the blue glow fading into something colder, more sterile, as if the room itself was being stripped of identity. The vaults along the walls sealed with a synchronized hum, locking down whatever knowledge they held inside. Lyra's breath steadied, her posture aligning again, not as a princess, not as a daughter, but as something new, something untested. Then we move now, she said, not asking. Ethan stepped to her side, no longer behind her, no longer a shadow, but a presence equal in the moment. The door behind them remained sealed, its interface dark, unresponsive. The system had already anticipated their path. It is locked, he said. Lyra moved toward it anyway, her hand lifting to the panel, but this time there was no response, no recognition, no access. Her jaw tightened slightly, not in frustration, but in realization. They have already removed me, she said quietly. Ethan watched the panel for a second longer, then shifted his attention upward to the structure above them, the ventilation grid, small, narrow, barely enough for a single person, but enough. We do not need permission, he said. Lyra followed his gaze, then looked back at him, understanding forming instantly. That is not a path meant for someone like me, she said. Ethan's expression did not change. It is the only one left. Another pulse echoed through the chamber, stronger, now closer, the air shifting as containment fields began to activate beyond the walls. Lyra hesitated for a fraction of a second, not out of fear, but calculation. Then she stepped toward him, closer than before, her voice lower than anything she had said tonight. Then do not hesitate, she whispered. Ethan reached up, releasing the magnetic seal on the grid. With a controlled motion, the panel gave way. With a soft metallic sound, he turned back to her, offering his hand, not as a command, not as an order, but as a choice. Lyra looked at it for a brief moment, then placed her hand in his. The contact brief, but grounding. Then they moved together upward into the narrow space above the chamber, just as the lights below cut out completely, and the system sealed the room behind them, not in panic, not in chaos, but in perfect controlled silence, as if it had already accepted that the catalyst had made its decision, and now the correction would follow. The space above the chamber was barely 3 feet high, forcing every movement to be deliberate, every breath controlled. The metal beneath Ethan Cole's hands was cold and slightly vibrating with the pulse of the system below them. Princess Lyra moved behind him, quieter than he expected, her presence no longer uncertain, no longer restrained by the structure she had grown within. The air was thinner here, carrying the faint scent of dust and insulation, and something else, something like heat, building in the distance. They crawled forward in silence, the narrow path stretching ahead, lit only by the dim emergency strips running along the sides. Ethan's display flickered intermittently, struggling against the system override, but still feeding him fragments of data. Containment zones expanding, access nodes collapsing, internal routes being rewritten. They are sealing every exit below, he said quietly. Lyra did not slow. Then we do not go below, she answered, her voice steady, no hesitation, no doubt. The difference in her was clear now. She was no longer reacting, she was deciding ahead. The tunnel split into 2 directions, one leading deeper into the palace core, the other rising toward the upper levels. Ethan paused just long enough to scan both paths. One was safer, the other faster, but exposed. He made the choice up. They shifted direction, moving toward the incline, the metal narrowing even further, forcing them closer. The confined space amplifying every sound, every breath, every movement. Lyra's hand brushed against his arm briefly, not accidental, not hesitant, just a moment of contact that grounded them both. Then it was gone. As they continued forward, the vibration beneath them grew stronger, not violent, not chaotic, but deliberate, like something vast adjusting its position around them. The system is not chasing us, Lyra said quietly. It is guiding us. Ethan did not disagree, because the pattern was clear, the routes closing behind them, the pressure building ahead. They want us to reach a specific point, he replied. Lyra's voice softened slightly then That is where we break it. They reached the end of the tunnel, where a final panel separated them from the upper access corridor. Ethan stopped, his hand resting against the sealed surface, his display flickering one last time before stabilizing, just enough to give him what he needed. This door is still independent, he said. Lyra moved beside him, her shoulder nearly touching his, then open it. He did not hesitate. The panel released with a soft click, and the door lifted just enough for them to slip through into the corridor beyond. The air was different here, warmer, brighter, but empty too empty. The lights above flickered in long intervals, casting shifting shadows along the walls. The palace no longer felt like a place of control. It felt like something waiting. Lyra stepped forward slowly, her gaze moving across the corridor, taking in every detail, every absence. This is the central ring, she said. They will expect us here. Ethan moved to her side now, fully beside her, no distance left between protector and protected. Then we stop being expected, he replied. She turned to him, then fully meeting his eyes, and for a moment, everything else faded. The system, the palace, the past, all of it reduced to a single choice. Standing between them, you knew from the beginning, she said, not accusing, not questioning, just stating the truth. Ethan held her gaze steady. Yes, a breath passed between them, not heavy, not light, just real. And you stayed, she continued. Yes, he repeated again. She studied him for a final second, then nodded. Once a decision made, without words, without ceremony, then we end this, she said quietly. Not with destruction, not with force, but with something the system cannot predict. Ethan understood immediately. Not strategy, not power, but will. They stepped forward together into the corridor, no longer running, no longer hiding. The lights above steadied, as if the palace itself had recognized something had changed, not in the system, not in the structure, but in them. The path ahead remained uncertain, the outcome undefined. But for the first time since the sequence had begun, the future was not something written in code or command. It was something else, something fragile, something human. And as they walked forward, side by side, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of meaning, because in a system built on certainty, the one variable